Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our last Let's Talk of April. I have a great panel tonight, and we're going to talk about transportation. And if you've been keeping up with the challenge, great. If you've fallen behind, that's okay too. You can catch up. If you haven't done it at all, you can still go get all the information. Just go to our website at YWCA.org. And I'm pretty sure I know everyone on here. But if you don't know me, I'm Becca Cotto. I'm with YW. And I'm the Director of Racial and Social Justice. So I'm just going to go around, mention everyone's name and kind of where they're from, and then we'll go in a kind of a roundtable and let them kind of talk about, their space, their place in this space. How about that? So first, Miss Vaida Owens-White, who is with several organizations, but I will let you tell about that if that's okay.
Certainly. Vaida Owens-White. I am a faith community nurse and work with various faith-based organizations throughout the state. I serve with the Wilmington Health Planning Council, the Division of Aging and Adults with Physical Disabilities, among a host of other community-based organizations. And my interest in being here is about the ability to access and equal access to transportation for those in the city and those who are physically challenged, those with developmental disabilities as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Bill Switek is with Wilmacco. It's not that hard, Becca.
You got my
Thank you for joining us.
But you get more points for pronouncing that. But I'm a principal planner with WMAPCO, and I'm going to actually drop it into the chat for those of you who aren't familiar with our agency. One of the things I do at WMAPCO is our equity initiatives, and at WMAPCO we call that transportation justice, which gets at exactly what Ms. Vaida was saying. Looking at equal connections and equitable connections for folks who are disabled and folks who have been disadvantaged by past and current program.
Awesome, thank you. And Marissa McClenton with the Sierra Club.
Yes, hello, I'm Marissa McClenton. I'm the Environmental Justice Associate Organizer for the Sierra Club Delaware chapter. And so one of our biggest kind of campaigns as a Sierra Club as a whole is we call it clean transportation for all. So like carbon emissions in general, transportation takes up a huge chunk of that because a lot of it is fossil fuel based. And so obviously looking at how we transition to cleaner forms of transportation, but what really tickles my brain is looking at transportation as an equity thing, and the fact that being able to get from point A to point B, not just from your house to work, but from your house to leisure and family and friends, it's an equity issue, it's an environmental justice issue. And so I get to work on both the climate side of transportation, but also you should be able to get around without having to buy a $15,000 a year car side of transportation. So that's really where I like talking about this.
Awesome, thank you so much. And last but not least, Sean O'Neill with the University of Delaware.
Yeah, thank you, Becca. Thanks for the invite tonight to participate. I'm going to follow Bill's lead and plug in the chat where I'm from here. But so I work at University of Delaware Institute for Public Administration. We're a research center located in the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Delaware. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary last fall. And Dr. Jerome Lewis has been our director for all 50 years. So a lot of folks, in Delaware, different positions have been through our Master of Public Administration program and know Dr. Lewis. But my work, I've been at the university about 7 years. Prior to being at the university, I worked at the Chester County, Pennsylvania Planning Commission. And so my background is both in real estate market research and in planning and zoning. I have a master's degree in community planning from the University of Maryland, and also worked for City of Annapolis and a few other real estate groups in the past. And work kind of varies, but I do a lot of work with DelDOT, a lot of work with local governments and other community groups throughout the state. Also with, other state agencies like the Office of State Planning Coordination, DENREC, other groups. And it's mostly applied research projects that involve students as well.
All right, awesome. Thank you guys so much. Just gonna whip up my questions and we'll go from there. All right, well, let's start with 95, why not? How has the history of discrimination in transportation shaped current infrastructure and accessibility? So that's not quite a 95, but I'll say it again. How's the history of discrimination in transportation shaped current infrastructure and accessibility? And we'll just go in our order that we started with. And if you don't want to partake in a particular question, just pass. But we'll start with Miss Vaida.
Well, I think the history of racism begins long time ago, and certainly access to getting to families and from the north to the south, and having to take specific routes in order to get to different locations safely, and try to have an enjoyable time on the way, trying to access hotel accommodations and gas and things like that. Has more recently it's been solved, but still, I think the transportation issue and having to get across long distances for families and communities is still problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Bill.
I think
Put the question.
a lot
Go
of it
ahead.
is you're going to hear is car centric planning, and so that just gets at the more recent history over the past half century or a little more than that. But it's the reliance on cars, I believe, is really behind a lot of the issues that we see today, a lot of the inequities. Just to give you a quick stat, low-income residents in our region, which is Newcastle County and also Cecil County in Maryland, are twice as likely to have difficulty reaching healthy and affordable grocery shopping than the average resident, and 5 times more likely than a high-income resident. So I think it's planning for transportation, not necessarily centered around the needs of lower income folks, but those of median or higher incomes.
Thank you so much. Marissa?
Yeah, I can speak to a bit of the more direct way. I call it kind of lowercase r racism, that more like systemic racism and how it impacts it. But there was whenever we were building these roads and we were building interstates and we were creating this infrastructure, whether it be intentional or not, I don't like giving people that I don't know the benefit of the doubt, but folks did not want to mingle with people that they found undesirable. And so in some areas, I was listening to someone talk about, it was in New York, and so they made some of the roads not big enough for a bus to fit to get to some parts of New York because they didn't want Black people and folks that took the bus to access that part of New York. And like those things are intentional, but you also have things where if you're not thinking about the lived experiences of the communities that you're working in, and you're just thinking in the terms of like data and like this road should go here because it's efficient, but you're not thinking about like standard of living, who's living around that, who's going to be impacted, that's where that more systemic racism feeds into our infrastructure. And so I think it's both a very intentional part, to be very clear, white people did not want Black people living near them and being able to be in their neighborhoods and being able to see them as they drove to work, but also in the more systemic nature of people just did not really consider how decisions that were made with a group of people that did not include those impacted at that table, those impacts were not considered. And so we put all this money into infrastructure way back when, and now we're kind of stuck with it because it's so expensive to just tear down and rebuild. And so I think that's how it kind of seeps into the cracks of how we see transportation infrastructure today.
And it seems like it's always, when you think about building roads, it's always through communities of color. East Side and West Side is a great example of how 95 has divided our city. Now we're trying to put it back together again. And it's just, as Marissa said, unequal separation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sean? Thanks, Ms. Vaida.
Yeah, I mean, you could go on for a long time on this topic, but I think, as it relates to Wilmington and I-95 going through Wilmington, kind of post World War II, we we started developing suburbs, which, you know, kind of had a dual purpose. One idea was to get people out of the city because it was, you know, unhealthy and a lot of smog and all that kind of stuff. And the other part was racism. I mean, and there were, you know, Levittown and a lot of those first suburbs were specifically, I think, banned non-white folks from buying a house. So, and not too long after that, in like mid 50s, the interstate highway system was created, and you know, helped facilitate that. With Wilmington in particular, I know, I mean, I'm not an expert on the whole process, but my understanding is that, you know, plans for a route through Wilmington began in the early 50s, and there were multiple routes, one of which I think is now 495, were considered, and they decided to build it straight through the middle of the city, which was controversial even at the time. But the Wilmington City Council approved it. And you know, it's, you know, there's a lot of things you could say about that, like the city itself approved something like that. I think at the time, you know, obviously there's racism clearly involved, and through that, the other part of the thinking was, I think, that they thought it would be beneficial to put the highway through the middle of the city, and it was also, you know, lower cost area to take the land essentially. And so that's how we end up with what we ended up with. And there are a lot of other mistakes in planning that are transportation related and not transportation related, like, you know, urban renewal, which, you know, theoretically had some good meaning behind them, but you know, racism was also often a component, and you know, they're you know, critical big mistakes that we're still trying to recover from. And Wilmington's not unique. I mean, the same thing happened in many cities. Same thing with urban renewal. Yeah, but it's just, you know, lack of equity, lack of kind of valuing well-rounded opinions and understanding the needs of all residents, you know, hopefully is more of a concern now than it was in the past. And so that's kind of how we ended up with the system we did. The other example I would put, and I think WMAPCO and the city are working to improve this one. I don't know where the cap of I-95 to Wilmington will go. I mean, that's very expensive, and there's a lot of other cities competing. The other project that I'm pretty sure is going to be done, which would be critical, is the Walnut Street corridor between the east side and downtown, which I believe it's Walnut Street. Is that right, Bill? It's
Separates downtown from east side.
Yes, separates downtown from east side. It's like basically a 4 or 5 lane highway. It's next to impossible to cross the street on foot. So it's essentially a barrier. And it was created to make it easier for folks to commute in from outside the city to downtown offices. You know, which is nice, except for the fact that it totally cuts off the east side. So there are plans to try to improve that road now. WMAPCO played a big role in that, and you know, try to make it more walkable, more appropriate for what should be, you know, mostly residential part of the city. Yeah, there's a lot to go on there, but I think that about covers what you wanted to hear.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm so curious what the race makeup was of the city council at that time, which I will eventually go look up, because I can imagine that they were not people of color in the 1950s, maybe one.
And just to follow up on that point, Becca,
Sure, please.
I was so curious to know the makeup of the communities that I-95 went through at that time. So I looked it up. I went to the 1960 census, and it was mostly white. I mean, Wilmington was a white city back then. Same with those communities, and it was 70% white from my recollection, about the same income level. So this was a middle income white community that the interstate plowed through. I think to Marissa's point, there was a very little public involvement process that went along with that. There were some groups that were opposed to it, but there were some groups that were all for it. And, you know, to Sean's point, one of the ideas was this road is going to re-energize the city because it was losing people to the suburban flight.
Mhm.
Wilmington's population by that time had already dropped from its high in like the 20s. So it was like, what can we do to bring people back in? And that was an answer. And I think more than anything, it led to further decline in the city because it just, you know, ushered folks out. But the demographic change is something to keep in mind. My hunch is, and I haven't done research, but it probably depressed the land values once that interstate went in. And then, you know, the poorest communities that were not allowed to settle in these nice new developments were forced to live there in this area. And to Sean's point, I mean, yeah, right now we're trying to reconnect it. It's going to be in the bridge area of the canyon, kind of where it goes through the city. But I think it's very important as that happens that there are some affordable housing and some other things that go into that project so that displacement doesn't happen again and a whole new demographic comes in that might not be there today.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. Thanks for like your brain's working my like mine. That's interesting to me. Now, my family, and I don't know about everybody else, but my family grew up in Wilmington. My mom grew up on Beach Street. Definitely part of the city. I live in North Wilmington in a house that was made 1952, the perfect time for white flight to occur. So my family is literally that. And that was like, you know, 1970 that they moved here. So anyway, and then the other thing I just wanted to bring up, Sean, you mentioned my deed, our deeds up here literally said that no person of color can live on the property unless they are employed by the homeowners. So, and that's still there. They just have a little line through it.
Yeah, I was going to ask who controls the purse strings, regardless of what the makeup of city council might be. Who controls the purse strings? You know, there's old American Indian saying that there was a typo on our currency. It was meant to say, "In gold we trust," rather than "God we trust." So it's all about the money. That is where we have to follow who has the pocketbook and who's counting the coins out and dispersing that money to our communities.
Yeah. And I think the next question we were going to ask, I'm pretty sure that actually Bill was ahead of us and answered it. But my question was about, we watched a video and it talked about how the highways wrecked American cities. But I think Bill covered that a little bit. But if anybody else wants to, you know, give their thoughts on that, whether they thought perhaps yes or no. And everyone, by the way, on the call, all of these things, all of the comments and stuff, you don't have to write them down. They will all come to you with the video. So in case you're trying to write down all these, you know, links, you'll get them all. So anybody have any thoughts on that?
The one thing that I found, because I went back and watched that video today, but it was just how recent the like position of urban planner is in relation to when these highways were being built. And so I was like, that makes so much sense that like the highways came first and then the urban planners and then the equity transportation planners came second. So I feel like y'all are now trying to catch up. But as soon as I heard that in the video, I was like, oh, pieces together. Like that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, because now people, oh, go ahead, Bill. Elaborate, please.
And yeah, I mean, planners have been around for hundreds of years or so, but I think you're right. It wasn't as formal of an institution, or there weren't many planners involved in that. It seems like a lot more engineers than planners at that time planning that out, and political interests, like you say. I think the video's generally right. I didn't, you know, find anything wrong. The one thing I would say is that just the link with the suburban sprawl is really important, and not just, you know, looking at the highway itself as the bad thing, but it's the exclusion, it's the residential development outside those cities that's a big problem.
Yeah, I was going to say, to just be able to pass over the city, you know, from North Wilmington to South Newark, you don't have to get off into the city if you don't need to. All right. You guys are very knowledgeable in this space. Thank you. So we did talk a little bit about this, but not everybody mentioned it. But how do you think our country's history of systemic racism is impacting transportation today? Ms. Vaida, go ahead. You go first. Or Bill,
Yeah.
whomever.
It's still an issue that we need to look at, because when I'm thinking of those that don't have automobiles, those that are socially isolated, such as our elderly with medical conditions, that we're still facing the issue of access to recreation, to medical care, to all these things that are necessary for us to feel that we are involved and part that the community engagements are accessible to all of us.
And that's really important.
Yeah, I really feel for particularly those that are trying to get to medical services and they have to wait hours before with special transportation that they're picked up, and once they're picked up, they're dropped off. They have you have to have someone with them if there's it's just no assistance that is available. You really have to be able to fend for yourself when you take on these public transportations, because the private lifts and medical transportation, they may pick you up and take you to your destination, but they're not going to stay with you and see that you get off into the building safely, that you know where you're going, or something like that. That might be outside the scope, but nevertheless, they're just picked up and dropped off, and you're on your own after that. I feel for those that can't get out, even to get to the bus stops or to be picked up at home, that may not be able to be properly assisted. And again, the waiting times before pick up and drop off and sometimes they don't even show up at all.
And I would say that it's funding. It's how we choose to fund our transportation system. If you look at the amount of money we spend on building new roads and expanding new roads and highways compared to transit, bus, even pedestrian accessibility and safety, it's minuscule. I mean, I don't know what the percentage is, Bill might, but the vast majority of the funding goes to building new roads and highways, often in the name or with the justification that it's going to improve the economy, which, based on a little bit of research I've done, is often not even the case. We use economic multipliers sometimes for expanding roads that really should not be used. They're not really justified. And I mean, and then you can ask the question, well, why are we spending money there versus elsewhere, where we clearly have the greatest amount of need with people with no cars. And why don't we make it easier for those folks to get around? I can't answer that question, but I'm sure race has a big part in it, whether it's conscious or subconscious. Because if you look at it objectively, other countries, I shouldn't say this across the board, but most other modern wealthy countries do this much better than we do. And I think there's a variety of reasons for that, but some of that's got to be down to race, in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, I think we should be funding the transportation system much differently, in my opinion.
Bill, you're going to say
Definitely. And just to give you that figure, it's about 10%. So 10% of capital funding goes to transit, and that's pretty steady year after year. And you're right, Sean, it's not enough. I don't think DART has really seen a major new expansion anywhere, you know, in my career. What they do when there is an expansion, they usually take it from somewhere else. So it's just I think that the folks at DART and the drivers and everyone are fantastic, and they do their best that they can, but they just don't have enough to do it. And one of the challenges again is that sprawl. It's getting from this point to that point to that point to that point, because a lot of times all of those medical appointments that Ms. Vaida is talking about, it might be over here, it might be over there. We haven't developed in a smart way to make it easy for transit to work. So it's difficult for transit to be successful in the space that we created. And just to add something else, like one of the things that I see as well is I think somebody made the point just about the underrepresentation of people of color on groups. We see that on even our public advisory committee, to say nothing of like the policy making. We see it in awareness of the agency. So I've got to believe that then perpetuates itself in how these decisions are made, because it's just not the lived experiences of many folks that are making the decisions that there is a huge problem.
And I just want to make one quick point that I'm sure Bill has heard me make before, and I make it all the time, because my wife works in labor and delivery at a hospital, and there's been a lot of evidence of inequity in childbirth and poor results from birthing deliveries. And one of the things that I think never gets mentioned is transportation access. If a pregnant mother has an appointment someplace for a prenatal visit, but she might not have access to a car, she might have other kids at home. It's a much more difficult task for that person to get to their prenatal visits. And so it shouldn't be a shock if they don't show up, because we don't make it easy for them. And then that leads to poor results.
Right.
So I mean, there's other reasons for it, but that's just one kind of anecdotal example of how all this plays out, and is just inequitable.
Yeah, not too many movies cover women on a bus going to be, you know what I mean? Like you always see that scene and people throw someone in a car. It's always in a car, right? So yeah, 10% is spent. That's interesting. We took that 10% and invested it in our infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure. I don't take the bus because it never goes in one place, and that's inconvenient. And I'm spoiled rotten. I have that, I have that advantage, and it's, I would like to ride a bus. Like I would like it to be, I don't want to have to drive a car everywhere, but Delaware is literally a car made state.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the other side of how racial discrimination and transportation are kind of interlocked, because I think that it also works the other way. Like I think racial discrimination created this kind of transportation thing, but one thing that I've observed over the years is I have started to take more public transit, and it's still not as much as I should, but if you just get in your car and you drive somewhere, you're not seeing so many people. Like you're physically not seeing them if you don't drive through certain spaces, and if you don't roll down your window and you don't talk to them. And so I think that when you're on the bus and there's other people on the bus, like you're seeing other people and you're seeing how they live. And I love the comment that Fran put in the chat, because I think they're spot on with, like, you see different people beside yourself and you take care of them because they're community now. And I think if you live outside of the city of Wilmington, just as an example, and you drive into the city of Wilmington and you park outside of where you're going and you just go straight in, you're not meeting the people of the place that you're at. But if you're walking, you're seeing some of the same people on your trip every day, and you're building that relationship. And if you're biking, maybe there are people that bike with you, you see the same people on your commute. If you're on the train, on the bus, like you're getting those interactions. When we look at how racial discrimination, how racism is kind of unlearned, it's always through becoming friends and really realizing the humanity in people that are different from you. And if we're only getting in our cars, getting to our destination, going inside, that's less and less opportunities for us to have those like perspective shifting relationships with people. And I think that is one of the really big things that I agree when I look at kind of car-centered infrastructure is, like, I think college is a great example. Like I met so many people just because we're going to similar classes at the same time. If I drove there, never would have known they existed. And like they've changed my life so much. And so I think that's one of the things that when we say these things harm all of us, like we're all being stripped of that human interaction because we're getting in our cars and we're turning on the radio and we're not rolling the window down to say hi to people. And it's just very like unhuman to me. And I think that that is a net loss.
That brings
Yeah.
up Tasmaria or Tasmaria, her
Tasmania.
Tasmania. She wrote that their thoughts of taking the only bus out of the riverfront. So even if you want to take public transportation, if they're going to omit some of the routes that are on, that is another way of socially isolating people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know for a fact that Tasmania was at the Equity Summit and already spoke to Bill about this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
yes,
an
so-
idea, just an idea. Don't blame me.
No, I'm not blaming you. But our next question is, what can we do to address some of what we've talked about here? What are some of the solutions that you see?
I'll just pick up on one thing with
Go ahead.
Marissa, because I think it was like somebody said in the chat, it was beautifully said. I mean, you got to work with the communities that are having the issues and, you know, hear from them what the problems are, hear about the solutions, and then implement them. I mean, it's not complicated. I think the knot that we have regionally and citywide is a big mess, but I've been really encouraged with some of the work that I've done with local communities and, you know, being part of a planning process to understand what the needs are and then trying to address those. So I think that more of that just needs to be done across the board.
And I believe that we have a responsibility to speak up for ourselves. If you're not satisfied or you feel like you're being shortchanged in some way, that you have district representatives, you have the city council persons or your state representatives, or even the transportation system itself, letters to the editor or writing to those that advocate for equitable transportation. You have to let them know, but so many times we are so accommodating that we hope that someone else will speak up and be the mouthpiece for us. But we have to stand up for ourselves. And if we feel that we're being unjustly sacrificed in some ways, we need to vote. We need to let our vote be our mouths and make a change, make a difference in our community.
Yeah, I just say when racism, it's two things. It's your heart and policies and procedures. And so to Marissa's point, getting to know people and knowing their hearts, it can totally change things. And then obviously policies, which is what we're talking about here. Like how can we address the situation? Because you're right, it's already established, right? So what are some of the things we can do?
So I would say there's actually there's like a real way to address this, and it would be to increase, like Bill said, dramatically increase the amount of transportation funding that goes towards transit and other types of infrastructure. And I'll tell you, like, the justification for it is that based on the like someone, and again, this wasn't extensive research, but I talked to a lot of people, including one of the top experts in the country on this issue from USC a few years ago. And my understanding is that most of the data shows that if you're not building a new highway, like an elevated highway, or you're not building a brand new road in an area, and you're just expanding a road, particularly if you're expanding it to more than 2 lanes each way, there really is very little benefit long term. Like there's really not a lot of good reason for us to be spending a lot of money to do that. And we would save an incredible amount of money if we just took the money we spent on those kinds of projects and put them towards transit. And even if you increase the amount of funding that goes to transit from 10% to a third, say 33%, that's 3 times the amount we spend on it right now. And it would make a dramatic difference And that's what I would like to see happen. To just, not necessarily stop building new roads or highways, but stop expanding roads to 3 and 4 lanes each way when they're not highways, and we know that long term, it doesn't make a significant difference to the regional transportation system. I mean, we know
Yeah.
this apparently. I mean, it was news to me, but apparently this is known among the people that know.
And it's
But
a
we continue to do it.
concept called induced congestion.
Right.
It's that, hey, you're going to put that lane out there because people are complaining that they can't get to work as fast as they used to. And what generally happens is that it does work for a year or two, but then more people take that route and then it's back to being congested. So it's a concept that needs to catch on in Delaware. And I'll leave it at that, but it needs to catch on because it's not something that's popular here.
So again, this doesn't come from me, but the way it was explained to me is that when you do something like that, yes, it does alleviate traffic in that particular area, but essentially all you're doing is you're displacing one area for another, because transportation systems, I mean, Bill knows this, transportation systems work regional. And if you expand a road to a certain extent in one area, first of all, there's no guarantee that you're not going to expand development and zoning, so you're just going to increase the amount of sprawl that you have, which is bad for the environment. It's not good in terms of providing transit and resources to folks, and it's costly over time. It costs us a lot of money to develop that way. So, I would hope at some point that we can rethink a lot of this. But to Ms. Levita's point, there's a lot of money behind the current system. There's a lot of companies. There's a lot of there are a lot of people that are well invested in the current system, and they don't want to see those dollars taken away from the roads.
Right.
And that's a big part of the answer.
Investing.
Yeah, and I want to jump on the sprawl bit because I think I kind of joke about it, but I'm so serious. We need to start shaming people out of sprawl. And I'm not talking about like shaming. I think people deserve like a little bit of shame for like moving into an area that is like uppercase S sprawl. But I think whenever developers put up plans that are straight up inconducive to like a good way to get around, and they have to build a new road and all of that stuff, shame them. Like, we don't have to be nice to people who are doing dumb things. Like, I think that we've kind of lost the plot in that arena. And if you're going to build a subdivision all the way out there that roads don't access, there's no grocery stores, there's no parks, there's no bars, like there's nothing. Shame them. Like, there needs to be a certain amount of shame from like us as the community when people put together these things. But I think there's also a lot of like, you have to watch for things. And so then you're always on the watch for when these things pop up, and that's exhausting. And so I think it's like it's a hard game, but I don't think we give the healthy amount of scrutiny to things that we know logically are not the best for our community, which goes back to Miss Levita's first point about like advocating for yourself. And so I think when we're talking about kind of above the canal, we're not seeing as much of that, but down in Sussex, oh my gosh, like, let's start shaming people out of sprawl. Let's start really saying, hey, I was driving here to your house and I didn't pass anything. I didn't pass a school. Where do you walk to? Like, where? And let's start to get people to really think about how transportation impacts their lives. And I think that only by kind of opening people's eyes to that, whether it be gentle or a bit rougher, is how we're going to start having everybody more invested in transportation from the equity side.
Well, and Marissa, I'm not disagreeing with you, but the way that I would approach that, if you're trying to communicate that to folks, is to focus on the cost, the long-term cost to the state of developing that way. And that's more of an education issue, I think. I don't think the vast majority of people understand that it is very costly for us to develop that way, particularly in Sussex County, the way we're developing it, which is a little bit off topic here, but there's a lot of low-lying areas in Sussex County. Transit access can be very difficult. You have an aging population. We don't have the healthcare workforce. There are a lot of issues there, and a lot of them are a result of how that county's developed and how the state's developed. And the sooner that folks can can kind of better understand that, I think the better off we'll be, and maybe we'll see some things change. But unfortunately, sometimes you have to make the economic argument. It's the only way to get across to some people.
Yeah, I
So,
think those are two different
well,
people.
no, there. So yeah, I mean, and I hear what you're saying in terms of shaming folks, but I think most folks might not even understand why you're shaming. You know what I mean? Like and there's a variety of reasons why, but
Yeah, I think it's all in really like what are we talking about? Like I'm not saying shame and like you live in a sprawl development, you are bad. I think
yeah.
it's more of like starting these conversations, and I do this a lot with like I couldn't find park and get here and that's not bad, or like starting to, if you do something that you know is disconnecting a community, and I think cost is an interesting way, but if you say like, oh, that's expensive, but people don't already have a concept of cost for other things in the state, I think that's tough. I think it's a good, like we make it in Sierra Club as like a cost argument when we're talking to like legislators and folks who like know the ins and outs. But if I'm talking to just somebody who's just moved someplace, talking about that experience that they're signing themselves up for, of like, you're gonna have to drive 15 minutes to get anywhere. Like the closest place to take your kids to a park is 20-minute drive away. And what if you're not home? What are they gonna do? Like, I think shame was the wrong word. I think we need to shame developers, but like
That's what I thought. Yeah.
people,
That's what I thought you
people
meant. I was like, I don't know.
to-
My parents bought this house. Don't blame me. I'm
Yeah.
like looking
Well,
at my yard. Like,
But
And the other thing about it, though, is that
it's
developers are
all
just
in.
playing by the rules that we set out for them.
yes.
Like they're
Yeah.
just building what they're building something where they can make money, where there's the least amount of resistance.
And
And
but they
we
know it's wrong, and then they're
Exactly.
lobbying to protect the ability to be able to do the wrong thing. That's why I say we shame developers, because they know darn well I refuse to insult their intelligence and say that they don't know that building a subdivision of these cookie cutter houses that is disconnected from any critical infrastructure is a good idea. I think they know it's wrong, and they've lobbied so much, and they sit in meetings and they fight for the ability to be able to build in this way, that I think we need to start shaming them and being really honest and saying, I think you're being intentionally malicious.
In gold we trust.
In gold we trust. I think it's both, but I think with the shame thing,
We're
some
gonna-
of it is a calling in, because some of our transportation problems are personal behaviors. And some of that needs to be a personal conversation about, hey, we could have taken the bus there. Or like, hey, did you know that like this is what sprawl is, and that you are living in an area that is sprawled? Let's talk about infill. Let's talk about how you can get engaged in your kind of municipal planning and transportation stuff to kind of fix that. Like, I think that's the gentle shame, the calling in on the personal level, but shame developers.
Yeah. The long-term cost, I think, is always, the barrier. Because it's hard. I advocate for a lot of things. Early childhood education is an amazing thing. If we could invest in that, the 20-year back end would be amazing, right? But it's getting a governor to be able to say, I care about what might be here in 20 years and not 4, right? So like, that's really, that would be so amazing to have an infrastructure, transportation wise too. Like, how do you take your kids to daycare? Right? Yes,
And
political will.
a lot of the issues are easy to fix too, especially in the sprawled out areas. And we call it sprawl repair in planning, but a lot of times it's just punching pathways through tree lines or connecting neighborhoods up where there's not a path there. It's not difficult, but those, I'll have to say, in my experience, are just unsexy projects. The projects that get folks' attention are these big trails that go from point A to point B along a river or wherever.
Right.
But a lot of the issues are just those micro connections.
Right. And the voice of being able to hear the community in this space. You brought that up, Bill. I think there's nothing more important than that. And just hearing people's stories and what their lived experience is in this, this area.
I think programs like this need a broader audience too. I do believe that education is most important in raising the awareness. And again, one of the things that I believe people would be more invested in participating in the community activities if they were aware of these inequities, if they were aware that they do have a voice and how to make that voice heard. With the funding that is necessary to make these changes, we need to ask for what it is that we need. One of the things that May 9th, I'll be taking the bus. I take the bus rarely because I need to go where I gotta go, get there on time. I can't be waiting for folks. But come May 9th, going down to Legislative Hall for the housing, I'm taking a bus because I understand parking is going to be prohibitive and I have walking issues. So how many people know that they could take part in the legislative process if they have transportation?
Right. And that's rare. That's just for, I mean, Sonia from the Housing Alliance Delaware really went out of her way to do that, which I really appreciated, because what she wanted down at Legislative Hall was people with lived experience in the being unhoused in the housing space. So, you know, and that comes at a cost for a nonprofit too, right? Even to do things like that. So my next question, and this is kind of broad, if when you guys probably think about it, in what ways does transportation impact the health of a community? And Ms. Vaida, you're already there. I'm going to start with you.
Absolutely. Again, getting access, even if the hospital is 6 blocks away from you, when you have 2 or 3 kids that you need to get there and you have to wait on transportation to get there, that's an impact on your health. With people experiencing cancer, when they have to go for treatments, they come out of treatments, therapy, having to wait on the bus, that further impacts their health. I think someone brought up about pregnant women getting to access their appointments. It all impacts on transportation when you have to rely on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill?
In many ways, as Ms. Vaida said, it's multifaceted. One of the big ways that we don't really think about is crashes. You know, there's 40,000 Americans a year that die from car crashes. We know that disadvantaged areas have more traffic, you know, and in Wilmington, it's the PED crashes that are killing and harming a disproportionate number of folks that are in disadvantaged communities. So I'd say that's one big one. Another one is air quality. So, you know, the emissions, the tailpipe emissions that are still coming from our mainly fossil fuel based system. It's not as significant as crashes, but it does impact quite a bit. Social cohesion, as Marissa said, and that gets into stress, that gets into mental health. And I'd also say just lack of opportunity to exercise, physical activity, because you have these barriers that are in your community. These are key issues.
We're just shaking our head. Yeah, I was waiting for Ms. Vaida to go from the whole thing, and then the person gets off their bus and they're in Edgemoor. And not that I love Edgemoor, it's close to my home, but the chemicals that you're breathing in or off of Route 9, right? Like, so this person is sick with cancer. I mean, just that whole picture in your head is entirely based on our environment and a difference transportation could make.
And I was going to add too a little something on the automotive industry that have cars that could go up to 160 miles an hour in the city. We have enough hit and runs accidents as it is. Why we need 160 miles an hour, unless you're on a racetrack, I do not know.
I'm not going to comment because my husband loves sports cars and he might overhear me, but I agree with you.
And I'm pretty convinced we have the technology to stop that. I don't know. I don't think there's any reason for a car to go that much higher than the speed limit in most cases.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what I agree with
Please.
everything that Bill was saying. But just wanted to add a point that I know like he makes all the time. And it's that, again, for someone that doesn't have access to a car, if you're living, just say you live near downtown Wilmington, you have to go to get the bus to get someplace, which often isn't the easiest, especially if the weather's not great, right? So you get there, you go get the bus, you trying to, say you want to try to go to work or doctor's office. You have to figure out how to take the bus there. A lot of times they're along Kirkwood Highway or Route 202. And then all of a sudden you're in a situation where you got to cross the road or walk along a very unsafe road.
Mhm.
So, I think pedestrian safety is another huge component to this. Because if you don't have access to a car, you don't have another option unless the bus is dropping you off right in front of where you want to go, which is almost never the case.
Right.
Yeah, these are all things that should be, much more of a priority, I think, really at the federal level than they are.
On a local level. I believe that we're supposed to be getting a good lump sum, if I'm correct, for the overpass. I mean, I know it's not like 10 years off, but the cap on 95, I think some money was secured for that recently. Yes,
Yeah.
sidewalk phobic. I love it, Francisca. Yes.
I worry about those that are in the motorized wheelchairs that they have to go out on the street in order to get from point A to point B. It help. My heart is in my mouth. My heart is in my mouth in trying to look and think how can we make it more accessible for those that have to be in those motorized wheelchairs.
Yeah, that's definitely an area to improve on. So EVs, I know there's a lot more to talk about, but we're at like 7:25, so I thought we'd get into EVs. Who wants to start? I know we're still talking about cars, but we could have, I think we're gonna have EV buses, right? Isn't that in the budget? Yeah.
We already have
Marissa?
some for
We do?
DART. There's a
Yeah.
bill that we passed last year to get electric school buses, and those should start getting rolled out pretty soon.
They are. They're being rolled out now, and I'm so pleased to be a part of that because the NAACP put some pressure on it because so many, again, another health issue. So many of our children have to deal with asthma, and those elderly that have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. That all this gas emissions are taking a toll on.
Yeah. I'm going to put Marissa a little bit because I know you're pretty. You worked on that bill, right? The EV bill that I think we just had one pass, right? Where are we in that? A different one.
Couple. We have had a couple EV bills passed, and we had some regulations adopted. So the most recent thing that has happened is that Delaware signed on to a modified version of the Advanced Clean Cars 2 program, which in other states, and it's modeled after California in that it kind of designates in, I think it's like 2030, that 100% of cars, new cars that are purchased, no, new cars that are delivered have to be zero emission or electric vehicles. Delaware only went to 82%. So Delaware is not saying that at any point 100% of vehicles delivered have to be EVs. I think it was interesting in the way you worded the question, Becca, not to get on you, but
No, go ahead.
EV mandate makes my
No, I know. I was copying that from an article because that's what everybody was so concerned about, the mandate, right? The mandate. And I'm like, you can't, it's hard to find an EV vehicle right now. And I mean, like,
it's tough. And so I think I have two wolves in me fighting about electric vehicles at any given point. And Bill's nodding his head because he knows exactly what I'm about to say. On one hand, our emissions from transportation are too high. Climate change is the existential threat of our time. The way that we get around, because it's based in fossil fuels, is warming our planet in ways that we cannot afford. And so whenever you're looking at that, and then you have a solution that allows you to get around in our sprawled state, in our car-centric state, without the dirty tailpipe emissions associated with internal combustion engines with gas-powered cars. That was kind of the gut reaction, was saying, okay, gas car bad, electric car good. And that is true to an extent, because when we're looking at it from an emissions standpoint, it's lower. We have healthier communities in California, in areas where they've had successful ACC2, that's that Clean Cars Program adoption. We have seen really great improvements to air quality because of how many cars are going through that area. So that's the number one. It's important to reduce transportation emissions. Hello, mother. Mom just walked in. It's important to reduce transportation emissions. Electric vehicles is like the knee-jerk reaction to do that. Switching wolves. The key problem is car-centered infrastructure. And so in my mind, and in a lot of our minds of folks who work in the kind of clean transportation realm, the number one answer is less cars. And then if you have to have a car, it should be low emissions electric. And so I think on that side, we have a lot of ways to go in terms of like transparency throughout supply chains. There's a lot of minerals that are used in EV batteries that are from very sensitive areas, specifically like the Congo and those kind of areas. And so like that gets tricky on that end. But the fact of the matter is we need less emissions from transportation, but we need to do it in a way that really honors the fact that good public transit is the number one solution. Electric vehicles go after it. And so I think we have too often, we kind of paint the solution as like electric vehicles, when the solution really is less cars here, better public transit here. Some people will need electric. We should electrify things like transit when we can, if it's our buses, if it's our kind of haul, all that stuff. Like all of that stuff is important to recognize. And then obviously the fact that like not everybody can buy an electric vehicle. I just bought a new car in January. Everyone was like, what are you getting? You're getting an EV? And I was like, no, I can't charge it. I don't have the money, even though they have amazing rebates right now. But I think that we get too stuck talking about EVs and then we don't actually talk about the clean transportation issue, which is at the kind of core of it.
I love that, because I was hoping that would be, I mean, like EVs are a solution to one thing, but I mean, EV buses are probably great.
So I guess I would add one thing to it. There are many other issues with EVs that we got to figure out. One is what the electric grid can handle. That's a big issue. And how are we producing the energy to power everything? Secondly, is, how do we provide EV access to everyone, like in apartment complexes or in urban areas where it's not so easy. People don't have garages to be able to just drive their car and plug in. How do you figure that issue out? And then the third is, and this should be relatively easy, although it's not easy, is the gas tax. A lot of our transportation system is funded through the gas tax. So we need to replace that with something else if we're going to push everybody towards EVs. So yeah, I mean, I agree. Like next car I buy, I hopefully be an EV if they're available and not crazy expensive. But there's a lot to figure out there in the meantime, particularly with the electric grid. I mean, that is a really complicated problem. We have to figure out how to produce enough energy to replace all the dirty sources in order to eventually get to where we need to get.
Yeah, and I've got a couple points, but the electric grid thing is so true, and I think that a lot of folks who are really engaged in this work can speak to that.
I've never heard that I heard about the Congo, and I have never heard that. Could the grid handle everyone having an EV? Well,
yeah.
The answer is no.
Yeah, our grid,
the answer is no, not even close.
Yeah, our grid also can't handle everyone having their AC on at the same time.
Right.
So like, I think that with the grid, like the grid needs to undergo improvements already. And so with the onboarding of renewable energies, Honest Club, we're trying to get offshore wind for Delaware. Had to do that for Sierra.
Yes, I was going to give it to you. Don't worry.
Yeah. But with the onboarding of renewable energy, but also we have these huge things that are sucking capacity from our grid, like these data centers and things like Bitcoin mining, those kind of things are like off in the shadows that are draining our grid. And it's like, that's in like one concentrated spot. But I think that one thing that we don't give EVs enough credit for is the way that they can actually increase resilience of our grid in a way if they can go both ways. And so what I'm meaning is if you have your electric vehicle charging in your home, and it has that power, and then the grid needs it, that car can then go, like the energy from your car can then power your house if that's needed. And so they can act as batteries, which is a really important thing. We're looking at resilience in our grid, that electric car batteries aren't just for the car, they can actually serve as batteries to store energy and then use it when you need it if the car is not being driven. So that's like one point. Another one I want to talk to back to ACC2, because I could talk on and on about it, but specifically why I don't want it to be called a mandate is because it's not. We are not saying you have to go out and buy an electric vehicle. Becca, you mentioned it before. It's near impossible right now to get an electric vehicle because you have to go out of state to get one. Every single person that I know, besides the two that have bought an EV this year, had to go out of state, spent their money out of state, took that revenue from Delaware to buy their electric vehicle elsewhere. ACC2, what it does is that it increases the amount of vehicles delivered to Delaware. If you want a gas car, because we went 82%, you will always be able to buy one here in Delaware. Will the gas be there? Will the gas be affordable? Not going to talk about that because I don't know the future. We saw how they spiked when we had the stuff happening with Russia and Ukraine in the beginning. We saw how they spiked when the fossil fuel companies were kind of gouging the prices of gas to raise their profits. Like, we've seen all that, but the reason that we don't call it a mandate is because it's not. No one is telling you that you have to buy an EV. What we are doing is trying to increase both the accessibility of it through rebate programs, both on the federal and the state level, but also through programs that encourage these car dealerships and makers to deliver more electric vehicles to the state so that I don't have to drive to Woodbury, New Jersey to buy my Chevy Bolt. Like, that's really what ACC2 has enabled us to do. And all the infrastructure stuff is going to happen kind of on the back end. Like I said, the grid's going to have to be improved anyways, just like for sole population increase. We have more people that are using more energy in more spots. The grid's going to have to build. And there are people that are way smarter than me in that aspect who are looking at how we're going to build our grid and make it more resilient to consider things like new energy sources, getting rid of old ones, and having electric vehicles. So very long-winded, but
no worries. Thank you. Yeah, during COVID, I think everybody moved to working from home, right? We actually had 3 cars and we sold one at the time. One's a sports car, it only gets driven on a special occasion. But like, everybody did that. Not everybody. A large percentage of vehicle drivers, their cars sat, and we saw what it did to emissions, right? And so it's like, that's facts, right? Because we had a period of time without it. Like, how does that ever happen in America where you're like, don't drive anywhere? But it happened for a while. So did we learn anything from that? No. All right. Let's talk about cycling. And as an option. Now, I can imagine if you gave everyone in America a bike right now, not only could they not ride it, but might not be in the physical condition to ride it as well. So, like, how does that become an option for people? I think in other countries where that's a huge thing is you start being in shape. You know what I mean? Because you're riding your bike places or you're walking. So it's something we completely take out of the formula here.
I see it as a good thing because I noticed recently that I saw some bikes that you didn't have to pedal even. Or motorized, but just to get outside the house or the community and get to the parks, if you don't have the physical stamina to cycle, turn on the motorized part and coast for a while, but get out and get into nature and get into the countryside or wherever it is, but outside where you can enjoy the environment. You know, we're stuck. I feel for those of us who feel like we live in a concrete jungle. We need to get out, and certainly I wanted to experience the bike trail down as far as it goes down to the beach, I heard.
Mm-hmm.
But I certainly wouldn't cycle there, but give me a motorized bike. I'll do halfway.
And I'm interested in getting people to bike to their job, getting the people to bike to their shopping and things like that. And and I did professional exchange in Belgium years ago, and it was really interesting just because the culture is so different with driving. In one of the cities, that there was no bike infrastructure, there was no bike lanes. It was just the drivers knew there was going to be a bicyclist there, and they treated you 100% differently. I think here we're so far on the other end, we might need that infrastructure to make it feel safe for the average person, and not the spandex warrior to be out there, going up and down these highways. So it's building that infrastructure to be able to get to those parks and to be able to get to those different places from your home, and not putting your bike on the bike rack and driving somewhere and then
Right.
using it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and biking is so freeing. Like I loved the articles that were shared about, I'm forgetting the name of them, but Becky, you shared them with the question, like one of the titles for it. And I'm thinking about the Gaza Sunbirds in Palestine who've made kind of biking and surrounded a lot of the movement with hope just because of the freedom that biking gives you, like the mobility freedom, the ability to go long distances with friends, and it's accessible and it's all that stuff. And I think it's amazing, but to Bill's point, there are not many places in Newcastle County that I would feel comfortable biking that was not on a greenway.
Right.
And I think it is that shift of we drive in our car and we see a biker and we're like, why are you in my lane? You should be on the sidewalk. But then that's not legal. And it's really a safety thing. And it's one of those other examples of how cars make everything just a bit worse, because the problem with people biking to work, like I used to work at Fujifilm right next to Croda. I was a sustainability advisor, and I was like, here's how you can reduce your emission. You can bike to work. And they were like, we're not doing that. And I was like, yeah, I knew you weren't. I knew that. Like, imagine going that intersection by the Royal Farms on Route 9, biking that, couldn't pay me at all.
Yeah, that's very true. I used to try to get my husband, we were only a mile away, but he was like, I'm not driving on. He's like, there's not even a bike lane. I'm like, all right. It's not that safe. All right, we are coming towards the end. I'm going to open it up for questions, but first I would love for you guys to kind of just summarize, or if there's anything I didn't hit that you think is really important for people to learn about. Be great if you guys could kind of do that. And if I say the audience, but if you guys have questions, you can come off mute if you want, or if you have stories to share. I know that's something that Bill is after, is getting stories. And actually, if any of you have a either one that you know of or a bad transportation story, I'd love for you to share that too.
I have like one parting word and then one transit story that's actually not about myself. It's about a friend of mine on the call. But just that one of the easiest ways for us to increase ridership is to ride ourselves and then bring people along with us. Like my new thing, and like it was actually a New Year's resolution of mine, is to take, like, I don't drive into Philly anymore. I'm either a passenger princess or I'm taking the SEPTA. And so I've started bringing my friends along with me, because for me, it was just that hump of it being unfamiliar. And I was like, I don't quite know how to ride the bus because I've never done it. But then I have friends who are like, oh, I grew up riding the bus, like we can do that any day. And I think that kind of leapfrogging of experience is how we're going to be able to increase ridership altogether. But then the transit story is that a dear friend of mine, Fran, I will see them down at Leg Hall, and one day they were like, yeah, I took the bus to get here. And I was like, I did not know that was an option. Like, how long did that take? And the answer is very long, but like it's available. But it's like people are really riding buses in ways that we don't know. And that's why it's, oh yeah, 2 hours. Like that's wild. But whenever we think about people that ride transit, I don't think we realize that it really is like the everyday person just trying to get where they're trying to get. And so I love that my friends will kind of share that kind of stuff with me.
That's great. That's great.
I would just say, like, on, bicycle, transit, anything that's non-car, it's really just about making it a priority and putting funding behind it and changing how we fund everything. Ultimately, that's really the only way we're going to make the kind of difference I think a lot of people want to see. Just have to, keep working at it. I mean, there are a lot of really powerful interests, that want to keep the system the way it is. But I think, hopefully over time, we can get a little bit more funding towards all these other, non-auto uses.
Well, run for something that has pocketbooks, Bill, and then
I wanted to ask Sean about the funding. He has brought that up a couple of times. You you have mentioned sometimes problems don't want to get solved because it benefits those that holds the purse strings. So how do you go about getting, if you're a community group, how do you compete against the big gorillas that hold the purse strings?
I mean, start local. Join one of Bill's councils. That's what I would say. Like, just get involved, do something.
So where's local? What do you mean by local? Besides,
State of Delaware, Newcastle County, City of Wilmington, advocate for more funding for non-auto uses. If you see that a road is being widened someplace, look into it, ask why, challenge the priorities. That's, it's just like you mentioned before. It's just like voting. I mean, it's another way of, there's a lot more to the civic process than just voting. I mean, you can volunteer for committees, you can get involved. It takes time, and nobody has time. And like we're talking about, it's difficult to get places. But every local government, anytime they make decisions, anytime they have a meeting, they're public meetings. Anybody can show up, and they usually will give you time to speak. So there are lots of ways to get engaged. If you really care about something, and the entrenched interests have a big advantage because they have a lot of money behind them. A lot of times they're, major corporations that make a lot of money off the current system. So it's not easy, but you got to start somewhere. So start wherever you can.
Yeah.
I think
start real quick. Start where you can is if you live in the Dover-ish Kent County area, they are doing their unified planning work program that they have an opportunity to read the draft and give comments on. Like when we say get engaged, like that's what we're talking about. Invite some friends over for dinner, have some drinks, have some dinner, read through the plan together. I get this section, you get this one. Let's share what we learned. Give comments through the virtual public participation options they have. Like that is the kind of getting involved. And I think with funding, there's a bunch of really big pots that I don't even know how to pull down, but a lot of it's related to the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of clean transportation stuff in there. So I think it's first engaging on the local level when we're doing these big strategic plans and saying in this transit area would love to see more projects about this, or even asking about what kind of projects are on the list. That's really when you say get involved, that's really what I'm thinking. I think with funding, it's people who are really good at writing grants that you really gotta understand and get to know and ask for those skills and all that stuff that's a lot bigger than my pay.
The other thing I will say, and I've only learned this through experience, in jobs I've had and the work I've done. If you see anything saying that it's going to bring X number of revenue or X number of jobs someplace, question it.
Yeah.
Question it, because a lot of the time it is not accurate. Like the formulas they use, the software they use are just flat out not accurate sometimes.
Yeah.
My last word will just be on the public processes as well. So as you go in and you try to work on those, work on the processes that they're using, because as we said, they're historically discriminatory. And I think we see a lot of that with COVID, as we talked about, that everything shifted online. Well, heck, we've done surveying that shows that low income people, only a third of them think doing online engagement is effective. So that in itself is a discriminatory thing. So I think as you engage, that's really true, but then also suggest, pound away at changing the participatory processes to be more equitable.
I was going to say, it's hard to find out about a lot of things until it's already done. They ripped down an entire woods up here and nobody cared when they were having the meetings because nobody knew But once it started appearing, it was all over, what is it, neighborhood or next door? Like people were ranting and raving. And I literally gave them the Sierra Club's information, Marissa, because I was like, if you guys want to start a community group, reach out to these guys and do it. Fran, I believe I'm calling her Fran because Marissa did. I hope that's okay. What is your question?
Yeah, Fran, I was saying Fran. Marissa calls me Fran because we know each other from college. Well, first of all, thank you all for caring about public transportation in the first place, because most people don't unless they take the bus. And I can't tell you all of my bus stories because that would take a really long time, and I have a therapist for that. But I just want to say I am someone that has a college degree. I work for the state of Delaware. I worked in Legislative Hall. I know how these things work. I contacted my state rep. I contacted city council. I contacted Newcastle County Council, and everyone said no to sidewalks. Everyone said no to more accessible bus routes. They said, this is too hard. Basically, they said, this is private property. We're not going to do this. I come from Maryland. Well, they will tear your house down for a sidewalk. Like they don't play about their sidewalks. And I also, so it's kind of a two-pronged question. What do I do to get involved when I know all of these things, when I can get in touch with my state rep, and have access and have resources? And the second thing is I hear a lot of discussion about educating people that ride the bus. I completely agree, because knowledge is power. And I think most of the people, most of the people on the bus probably don't know who their state rep is. They don't understand how city council works. But also, how can we educate people who don't take the bus that these people are not people to be afraid of? I hear people talk about all the time, like, oh, those people are dangerous. Someone last week was like, aren't you scared on the bus? And I'm like, no, once I'm on the bus, people take care of each other. People save seats for each other. People say hello. We talk about how much the bus sucks. Like, we have community together. And so how can we educate other people about how putting a bus stop in your suburban neighborhood is not going to bring drugs or crime there? So kind of two questions. How do I get involved with maybe some of the discussions that Bill is having? Because these DART workshops are in the middle of the workday that they want feedback from, and I can't leave work to go to them. And also I'd have to take the bus. So anyways, that was a long question, but two-pronged.
I would say, just to answer the first one, I would say just be persistent. Like I worked in public sector, for most of my career, not all of my career, because I worked some in real estate, but even in that, I'll tell you, like, when people are persistent, eventually they will listen to you. If you're loud enough and persistent enough, if you start showing up to every single council meeting, if you keep calling your representative and you do it over and over and over again for years, they will listen eventually. And people don't believe it, and it can be very frustrating, and I get it, but I've seen it over and over again. I've seen it. Like if there is a group, especially an organized group, that is loud enough and they continue to beat the drum on the same thing over and over again, eventually, the public politicians will respond some way. Initially, probably not what you want, but the thing is, just keep being persistent, and that's the best way to make progress. And I would say, if you can join an organized group or get some friends, to join you, that's even better.
Yeah, I was going to say, get to know your neighbors, because if you have a shared representative, that's something that you can kind of address with them. The other thing is, it's an election year, and it's a big election year. I've been telling every advocacy group, if you do not get a governor on the record right now into committing whatever it is that you've been working for the last 8 years, you're not that brave. Because we have 4 candidates now. So we should be able to get some commitment on, like, what are you actually financially investing in? Because I never realized how important the governor was until the last 6 years. And he basically, like, these are his initiatives, and that's what is covered with the budget. And then there's little drippings for everyone else. So if this is really important to you, try and organize some people, talk to the governor candidates, volunteer for one. If you volunteer for candidates and they win, that's an amazing thing, because now you have a friend down Legislative Hall that at least answer your calls.
I just add to that too, and I'll put my email in the chat, Francisco, so you can feel free to jump onto any of my committees. But I agree with Sean. I mean, get organized. If there's a wider need in the community, try to get a plan done. I think that's a key way to do it, where you have that visioning session with all of your neighbors. It's going to be a lot harder to ignore or brush off when you have something that has that buy-in. And even then, it's not foolproof. I mean, plans, I can tell you, just a lot of times, certain elements of them just don't ever get done. I spent a lot of time at the Equity Summit just talking about basic signs that weren't done. So it's super frustrating, but I think it gives you the best chance of at least getting some of the key community needs addressed.
Tasmania, I see your hand up. So we have 6 minutes at a hard stop here. So go ahead and talk, but I still need Miss Vaida to kind of close up and finish her
I'll be
thoughts.
very quick. I have been riding this bus since it was 35 cents. Okay, when we had transfers, when the bus stopped at 5 o'clock. I cannot tell you how hard it is as a disabled grandmother of 10 to get from even 9th and Market all the way down to the train station or the Wilmington Transit to catch a number 5. It's horrible. Let's talk about the bike lanes. Okay, let's talk about that for instance. This place raised all of that money for a bike lane that very few people in my neighborhood wanted, very few people in my neighborhood use. Okay, they could have taken that money and fixed up a property for the unhoused. We're talking about transportation. There is no doubt in my mind that this was planned the way that it is. You are taking impoverished and handicapped people and the elderly from being sociable. Why? They can't get to their basic needs. It's hard for them to get to doctor appointments. It's hard for them to get to the market. So you are creating food insecurities. Forget about being social. Okay, now you want to take, and there's no doubt in my mind again that they're going to take that 25 out of the riverfront, because for one thing, they don't want us down there. I personally got a $342 ticket for loitering, right? Because if you see my cart, you think I'm homeless. My cart only has 2 wheels, and I always have bags on top of bags on top of bags. The police officer thought I was homeless, or I don't like to say homeless. Let's say unhoused. I went to court. I showed them there is no loitering sign at the riverfront anywhere. There were 2 elderly people, not even 4 feet from me, who were eating an ice cream. I went and bought the ice cream off the fact that they had one. I don't even like ice cream, but he came over to me, gave me a ticket. I went to court. I took pictures every day of them having concerts down there, of them having marches down there. I participated in the Del Tech March. And guess what? The gentleman thought he was doing me a favor by knocking it down to $50. But what he did was, you made the ticket null and void. You can't change a ticket once it's written. Evidently, he forgot that I knew that. Here I am, a law student, an honest taxpaying citizen, and they gave it to me. So I can imagine, now you can't, we're talking about transportation. Go inside the train station. Unless you have a ticket, you can't go inside the train station. A federally funded building. Let's talk about the Wilmington Transit Center. There are no public bathrooms there. Do you realize the only place you can really go to the bathroom downtown is the library and Walgreens, if they're operational? Now, federally funded buildings, they're telling the unhoused that they can only bring a 1 bag. So what's going to happen to their personal belongings? This all goes back to when they moved the buses from Rodney Square. That was designed. Why? Because those officers up there did not want people inside Rodney Square, right? Then they had a private security walking around, moving people along. They moved all of the benches off of Market Street Mall. Why? Because they don't want you sitting up there. Mm-hmm. So this is all planned. How can we fight against this? It's a better way we can fight against this. Community involvement. Mm-hmm. We got to get involved. We got to start these grassroots. We need to demonstrate. Why are people so afraid to demonstrate when they know something is wrong? Get you some elderly people, get you some children, get you some signs, march down there to DART and demand better treatment. Poor, impoverished people kept this city going when other people moved outside this city. We keep DART in service. Why? Because we have no other choice but to use DART. Okay, not everybody has a car. You're talking about an electric car. I don't even have a scooter. Okay, so I depend on DART to get me where I want to go, even to do a doctor's appointment. Do you know it takes me 30 minutes? Not only does it take me 30 minutes going one way, I have to get off in front of ShopRite to come all the way and back in town because I cannot walk across Concord Pike. So you're talking about a whole hour. Your doctor appointment is only 20 minutes. So let's talk about how it impacts everybody's life. And see, as long as the haves believe it's only affecting the have-nots, they don't care. So now we need to go door to door. We need to canvass and go door to door and make people understand what this lousy, again, I've been riding the bus since it was 35 cents, so I can talk about them. Okay, what and how it impacts all people, not just poor people. Thank you.
So, Tasmania, I agree. I mean, I appreciate all that. Agree with everything you said. I just wanted to make sure, like, if you're advocating, you advocate the right places. And Bill, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the decision to move out of Rodney Square was the city's decision,
Oh,
No, it
right?
wasn't.
Not Dart's.
No, sir.
Carney.
No, it wasn't.
No?
It was
Oh, it's
Carney.
Carney's?
It was
Okay.
the mayor
Brzezicki.
office.
Mhm.
It was all of them because when we got
right,
the
yeah,
information,
yeah.
it was redacted. It
Yeah,
was
I by
and
the city, I meant the
and the
mayor.
law office
Yes.
and those
Sorry.
law offices and those downtown offices. We got the information. But
Right.
again, why don't we start this movement and let's start canvassing? Let's go door to door. I say let's protest against DART.
Well, and that's the other thing I'd say is that, like, DART is getting hammered in terms of funding, just like all other transit agencies right now. The
And
real
they're a
issue is
victim.
that we're not funding them appropriately. And like since COVID, they've lost all the white collar workforce.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of revenue that they're not bringing in that they used to bring in. And that's true across the country. And so we need to fund all these systems more than we have in the past. It's not really a choice anymore. We're going to have to fund them just to keep them functioning the way they have.
But white collar workers did not keep the city going. The
Oh,
poor,
no.
impoverished people who could not leave kept it going. When you go to bus, you need to catch the bus and see who's on that bus. It's poor people. White
Yeah.
collar people have cards. The only time they ride the bus is when it's convenient. You will lose your job behind DART trying to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Like
Spend
to-
a lot of time in
I would like to
transportation.
just jump in and say
Please.
to Tasmania, please, I put my email address in the chat. And I'm with you around organizing the community around transportation, as well as the education is very important. I
Mhm.
think people need to be made aware of what the situation is and then take action. But first we need to raise the flag and get people involved. So please contact me, email, let me know where you are so we can meet and start planning.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and I
There's,
think
oh, go ahead.
one
Marissa. Yeah.
real quick thing. I think this is a perfect, like, I cannot have a better example of how nothing exists in isolation. And it's like the reason that I'm in the environmental justice field is because environmental justice touches every other thing that I care about. And so this is a really good example of how you can't take away housing justice from transportation justice, from environmental justice, from all these kind of equity things. And so I think whenever we're talking about how to bring our full selves into planning processes, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about when we're talking transportation, bring up housing, bring up where the grocery store is, bring up you getting to work and see your grandkids. Like when
And
Bill
the
was
medical
talking about
healthcare.
yeah, and the medical, like when Bill was talking about the different experiences that need to be brought in, like that verbatim is what we're talking about. Like these people need to hear about the kind of lived experience on the end of this very technical plan. And we need to bring in as much as possible the kind of intersections of other justice areas when we're talking about justice in transportation and like everything. And so I love when there's kind of cross-pollination in any equity sense.
And climate.
Mhm.
And climate, you know me. We all gotta be on the same planet.
Yes.
It is
Well,
all
thank you all so much. And that's why we do these is for educational purposes, is it's to tell people who aren't thinking about this or talking about this. And a lot of people say they care about racial justice, and racial justice in so many spaces, like transportation may not come to somebody's front of mind, especially because they're not in the community, right? And they want to do nice things, but they don't, like, there's a whole concept to not understand. My husband grew up not having a lot of funding either, and he would have an asthma attack and have to get on the bus in Newark to go to Christiana Hospital. And when he told me that, I was like, I can't even fathom being a mom, put your kid that's having an asthma attack on a bus because you can't afford, an ambulance or anything. Like, how scary is that? For families. Well, thank you guys all so very much. I know I kept you a little bit later than I planned to.
Rebecca, could I have just one last word?
Please, you close us out.
I would like very much, when we talk about the solutions, I think from my perspective that it isn't just communities of color that need to be a part of the NAACP. We need voices. We need people of influence that look like other folks that are keeping the funds to themselves, to speak up and be a voice with us, to be allies on racial justice issues. Join your local NAACP so that we could have a collective impact on how we address our legislators and help raise information awareness for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think everybody's contact information is in the chat. So if you're on here and you didn't get a chance to write it down, like I said, we'll send you out the video, and we'll also send you out the all the comments. So good night, everyone. Thank you again so very much.
Thank you for
Bye,
having
y'all.
this forum.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.